So, colleagues, we're going to start the meeting. Are we live streaming in a moment? Oh, right, brilliant. Okay, so welcome to the Audit Committee of Monday, the 23rd of February. My name's Alan Connett. I am chairing the meeting, and to my left is Councillor Paul Hayward, who is Vice Chair. Apologies for absence. Oh, it's one, isn't it? I think, yes. So Laura Ottery, one of our independent members, and that gives me the opportunity to welcome Tim Beard, our other independent member, to our first audit meeting. Very much welcome, and thank you very much. I need to remind everyone joining remotely to mute their microphone and please turn off their camera unless speaking. The meeting is being live streamed. And just need to make sure that when you are speaking, you speak into the microphone, please, so it picks you up. We're not expecting a fire alarm, but should it go off, please exit the room and follow the fire exit signs to the nearest assembly point. Please could we ensure that we address everyone by their proper title, so if it's councillor or Mr, or the officers by their designations, please. Basically trying to avoid first names, because if you're looking in on a webcast, people may not know who we are talking to, and it looks frankly a bit chummy if we refer to each other by our first names. It says here that I'm assuming that all members will have read the papers, but I think you know that anyway, so that's fine. Cabinet members and officers are asked to keep their introductions to their items brief. Oh, I didn't know we were going to have any, but thank you very much. We'll come to that later on. And then a final reminder not to hold individual discussions while others are speaking, which reminds me on timeliness. I need to leave the meeting at 4:45 and the Vice Chair needs to leave the meeting slightly before that. So for officers, we'd like your commentary to be insightful and brief. For members, we just like your commentary to be brief, if that's all right. So we're all going to crack away, and what we really don't want to be doing is ordering breakfast because the meeting's carried on that long. Right. Any declarations of interest, please? We're failing about anything interesting to declare. All right, and then minutes, may we agree the minutes of the 24th of November 2025 as a correct record? I'll propose. Councillor will second. All in favour? Lovely, thank you very much. There are no items requiring any urgent attention, and we will move straight to item 6, which is the Grant Thornton Audit Progress Report. Lovely, thank you. David Bray.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the slight delay. Despite your instructions to be brief and insightful, I've failed with the first instruction. So I'm sole representative from Grant Thornton today. I've recently taken over from Samantha Harding as the audit manager for Devon County Council. Chrissy continues as the audit manager for the pension fund. There's some familiar faces around here. I've previously been the audit manager for Devon County Council a couple of times in the past, and indeed Angie and I have worked together over many years, so it's a pleasure to be here on a last audit committee. So with your permission, Chair, I'll take the paper as read. So this is just really a summary ahead of the audit plans which are coming to the next meeting of this audit committee, to give you an indication thus far as to where we think the key focus areas for the audits for both the County Council and Pension Fund will be for 25-26. As you're aware from previous audit committees, the work of the external auditor covers both the opinion on the financial statements and also what's known as the value for money assessment, again following the instructions issued by the National Audit Office. I think we'd all have our own definition as to what we understood by value for money and how we would go about auditing that, but we're governed by the remit that's set by the NAO. So we set out our focus areas for the opinion audits for both the pension fund and the County Council, and also the value for money aspect as far as the main council audit is concerned. We also set out the timetable for the deliveries for this year, and our aim is to get the financial statements audit completed by the end of November this year. That was achieved for 24-25. It's slightly different this year due to the introduction of the new financial accounting system, but speaking with management, we're confident that we can achieve that. The statutory deadline for 24-25 is Friday of this week, so the 27th of February. Next year it moves back, next year even, it moves back a month to be the end of January, and thereafter it moves back 2 months to be the end of November as part of the government's aim to improve the timeliness of financial reporting. So by aiming to achieve that in November this year, it sets us all well for when the deadline actually becomes in statute. And again, that's a really important deadline, because the expectation is that the auditors stop when the deadline happens, no matter how close to completing the audit you are. That's a fixed point in time, and it's really, really difficult to regain assurance where an audit hasn't been completed. So again, I think we're in a strong position as far as that's concerned for both the main council and the pension fund. There's just one thing that I wish to draw to your attention, and that's regarding audit fees. And when Peter Barber told you what the final fee for 24-25, he overlooked the fact that PSAA already included an allowance for the external auditor's expert for land and buildings valuation. So the quote that Peter, not the quote, the fee that Peter quoted to you was slightly overstated. So this update corrects the position as far as that's concerned. So I just wanted, although the difference isn't significant, just wanted to make sure that members of the committee were cited on that. So in terms of brevity, Chair, if I stop there, but be more than happy to take any questions in terms of this update or in terms of the wider wider public sector external audit.
Lovely, thank you. Any questions from colleagues? No? One question I wanted to ask, if I may, Mr. Bray, was in relation to some of the key questions for audit committee to ask officers. I'm assuming you weren't intending that we were going to do that right now, but simply that what our external auditors are encouraging us to do as a committee is to take those questions on board and pose those questions through the course of our work. Is that what's intended?
Yeah, it's intended to be for information only, rather than sort of a formal question to management seeking a formal response back. It's just where we've drawn out what we think are the key issues that would be of interest to a particular audit committees. And we tried to summarise national reports in a succinct way, with perhaps areas that the members might want to focus on. It's not typical for members to ask questions on every single thing, but occasionally there might be one particular report that gels with a particular group of members, and they may wish to ask questions on that, but it's certainly not meant to be a sort of a formal question and response as far as management is concerned.
I really appreciate that. It was simply that the council or the committee's taken, if you like, what Grant Thornton advises, and I just didn't want to trip over what might have been an obvious trap, as in questions are posed but not asked. So I thought I'd just ask you. So what I'm going to suggest is that we support the recommendation to note the attached audit progress report, but actually take the questions into the work of the committee. And if you're content, the chair, vice chair, with our support officer, will work that into the committee's agendas over the course of the next few meetings. Is that all right? You're content to second? All in favour? Lovely, thank you. So that's done. Thank you very much. So let's move to item 7 rather, which is the internal audit draft plan 26-27. Hannah Hellier, Senior Assurance Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So so this is our draft internal audit plan for 2026-27. The committee are asked to review and consider the areas identified within the plan, and then agree the plan if they're happy with it. So I will go straight to page 28, which is the draft proposed plan for 2026-27. The thing I would like to draw your attention to is when you look at the column for adult services, you will still see that it is missing some elements of the plan. That is because we are still waiting on the final letter from the CQC. Once we've had that, we will meet with the leadership team for adult services and then put the rest of the plan together and bring that here for your approval. Happy to take any questions on the plan. The rest of the document really just sets out how the plan has been put together, but it's page 28 that holds the plan.
Thank you. Questions from members? While they're being pondered, may I ask, how does the committee going about changing the plan if it wanted to, and if the committee found that something was going on in the council that it wanted the audit plan to accommodate?
Yeah, Thank you, Chair. Yes, so changes to the plan are any changes to the plan are brought to the committee on a quarterly basis. However, if there's anything in between that obviously we need to make you aware of, or you would like to make us aware of, so we can have those conversations.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Morgan, then I'll come to Councillor Rake. Oh, we didn't. Oh, was it Councillor Rake? Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the CQC thing, how much slack do you have available? If I mean, what sort of quantum of work could you take on following the CQC report?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Yes, so we have days aside for adult services. So once we know what the CQC areas are that we need to include, we can accommodate those. Obviously, depending on the volume, then we may have to have discussions on other high risk areas. But again, until we have the confirmation of that, I'm not sure at the moment. But yeah, we can accommodate it.
And if I may, just the question I wanted to ask was, are you content as our senior assurance manager that the plan is robust and it covers all of the things that you think this committee should be covering?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm comfortable that the plan is robust and does cover everything, and then will give us enough coverage to give a end of year assurance opinion.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, content? So, question. Yeah, absolutely.
One minor point on page 40 of the report, which is the reason for exclusions from the plan. Just a slight edit needed. Then line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 and 6 are duplicated. If you could just have that struck out just for the purposes of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that amendment, Councillor, would you happy to propose? I'm happy to second. Have we all agreed? Lovely. Thank you very much. So that's that done. And then
members. There's a requirement for this to be agreed to ensure that the internal audit activity can happen in the way that it should do, and it is intended to do. There are various references in there to the regulations and guidance, but the principle is it is setting out roles and responsibilities. It does cover everything that it should do in relation to those council audit regulations, etc. And it is an ask for the committee to agree that to ensure that it can support us in our activity.
thank you very much. Councillor Rake?
When I looked at this, I didn't get the impression it was a very malleable document. I mean, you're not asking for our input, just for us to nod it through, essentially.
If I may, perhaps not nod it through, but in essence, I would say the important thing is to recognise the different roles for everybody involved, including the audit committee. Yeah, the malleability is it is set, it defines and answers questions that are asked through those different regulations. So changes around the edges might be possible, but the key messages are as they need to be. Even I don't have too much of a choice in those. So it's, yeah, agreement from the audit committee that there is nothing in here that they feel they can't agree to.
Thank you. So the questions I had, and probably more related to this committee's relationship with the Devon Assurance Partnership Committee. So the Devon Assurance Partnership Committee is the body which manages the partnership, and that is attended, as I understand, by the heads of finance of the various member organisations. So how does this committee see what that committee is doing, because we don't receive, or it doesn't share its minutes, for example. So some of this document is about the engagement of this audit committee with Devon Assurance, basically its management committee, but we don't see that. So how do you, as the head, propose that that communication is created?
So yeah, the link, so you've got three bodies, if you like. You've got this audit committee, you've got the Devon Assurance Partnership Committee, which includes chairs and vice chairs from all of the partners, and then you have the management board, which, as alluded to, includes normally the section 151 officer from each partner. The roles and responsibilities of each of those are set out in the partnership terms of reference, and the aim is that actually we bring the management board inform and endorse the report that goes to the DAP committee on those roles and responsibilities and expectations and areas of information. So there is a link there that flows through. My answer in summary to some degree is, if there is information that you don't feel you're seeing in either this committee or the DAP committee on how we're performing, we raise that probably in the DAP committee, and then we can inform the various body, whether that's the DAP committee or this audit committee, are reporting to each. But ultimately, there's normally a representative of the DAP management board, i.e. Angie, if I may pull on Angie, given that she's here for now, would be at that DAP committee meeting. So you would also then be able to ask questions of the management board and not just myself. So there's a flow through, but in essence, if you're not seeing something or don't feel that you're getting something, let me know and we'll work through the best process to get that to you.
I'll come to you in a moment, if I may, Councillor Sellis. I just want to carry on the point. This committee couldn't know what it doesn't know because it doesn't see the minutes of the DAP committee. So I think it's important that this committee is aware, but I don't want to spend long time on it now, because I think we'll get into the nuts and bolts of things. What I'm likely to do, and I'll think of a form of words, is ask the committee to support a recommendation that you come back as the head of Devon Assurance Partnership with a proposal about how this committee is informed and communicated with. All right, Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. It's following on from your comments. I just question, there's an awful lot of information, and mentioned it briefly at the meeting this morning. I wonder if there is merit in producing a handy facts book for audit members and also for council members, so that when it comes to having a full meeting, there's an awful lot of repetition in the documents which we read, and it's actually quite Herculean on top of all the individual cases that we all work on for our electorate. I'm just wondering if you can see a way of simplifying it. So clearly we do need a sort of highway code so that members understand everything. However, I do find the repetition and irksome. As you know, I do have paper copies because I couldn't physically scrutinize everything on the laptop because my eyes just get tired. So, and it's also, you know, what key information we're getting out, Chairman. That's what, you know, following on from what you were saying, because I think there's a risk that we miss things, which as an Audit and Governance Committee, we mustn't.
Very briefly, I think there's probably a bigger conversation to be had in that, but I think the ability to produce an executive summary for each piece of information you have in front of you hopefully is embedded or engaged, and we can work on those from our perspective, and I don't want to answer for others, but I think part of the challenge comes from the role of the committee is set out and is quite stringent, really. So the information needs to be put forward and produced. I think the question of how that is formatted and presented to you is perhaps a different one and a bigger one to take offline. But I think, speaking for myself and others, we can try to make sure that we give you a good summary of information. I think the other bit, and coming back to our session this morning, is the more we can inform members of the committee about the activity that goes on to bring the information to them, the more assured you can be around those summaries that you get and the information you receive from other officers as well.
All right, colleagues. So if I may, if I give you an example, if you were looking at page 48, under this agreement, one of the things the audit committee oversight would be, for example, is to review the internal audit functions expenses via the DAP committee. But if we never see and never know what the committee's done, we can't hold it. We can't have a dialogue. So what I'm going to suggest, colleagues, is that on page 43, you'll see the recommendation set out that we agree the internal audit charter and strategy for the year 25-26. And may I suggest that we do that, but subject to at our next meeting, an update from the head of Devon Assurance Partnership on how we actually fulfil those obligations of communication both ways. All right. Consent with that, so I'll move that. And Councillor Hayward, I've just got, yeah.
I think this might be a discussion for another day, but when you kindly presented to us at Buckfast Abbey, very helpful training day, the issue of these global internal audit standards and our need to comply with that. And I think it will be helpful for me because having just sort of gone into this rabbit warren of this, those are standards that we have to abide by. Those standards come, and I've got the AI blurb here, and it sort of comes back to the Institute of Internal Auditors. That body is non-profit making, and I can see from here that effectively they're always on the lookout for donors to help fund them. And in the modern world we live, where donors can sometimes end up being the drivers of standards, it's, I suppose, the nutshell is, who made the GIAS the sheriff of Audit Town? The things that we have to abide by as a local authority, and every local authority has to abide by, ultimately goes all the way up. Who's guiding what they say we must do? Because often, you know, it cascades down. You must do this, you must do that, and now there's a tweak, and we've now got to ask you to do more, and the external auditors insist on things. Who's setting that agenda? And that. I appreciate, mindful of the chair's statement that we are all to be brief. I've been complete opposite. Perhaps as a latter thing to this committee is just some insight as to where that direction is coming from, because I don't know enough.
Thank you. So very, very briefly, yes, and even a bit of more context, there's an internal audit standards advisory board which takes that IA bit and turns it into something else. So there is something, but I can give you more outside.
Excellent, well done, thank you very much. Councillor Rake. Oh, is it?
Well, can I just say briefly that, I mean, I've been chair of audit at Teambridge since 2019 and also chair at Dartmoor. And I was quite, excited to be put on the Devon County Council audit. But I've got to say, it's huge. And despite having, 7 years experience, some of it is still impenetrable. And I think it's not actually anybody in this room's fault. The fact is the goalposts keep changing every 5 minutes and things keep changing. And it's really hard to keep up, and you think you've got it sorted and the next thing, something else comes in. So I sympathise with you a lot having to present this in a clear way when everything keeps changing, but it just brings home to me how big the job is to audit an organisation like Devon County Council. It's massive. So I don't know if that helps, but that's my opinion.
Councillor Rake.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Perhaps you yourself or Mr. Rose could clear up. There was one of the committees you listed that consisted of chairs and vice chairs. Is that chairs and vice chairs of audit committees? So, and which committee is that, and which is the one that the chair doesn't think we're getting information from? Because I'm a little confused.
So the one I was referring to, the Devon Audit, the Devon Assurance Partnership has its own management committee, the DAP committee. That's attended by the chief financial officers of the partners. There is no direct member engagement. I'm not worried about whether there's direct member engagement, but the point I was trying to make to the audit committee was that we're undertaking in the audit committee oversight a number of obligations, but without the connections to the DAP committee that enable us to fulfil them. And rather than spend time now on reports, I think it's best that the head of Devon Assuring Partnerships comes back at our next meeting with a proposal about how we can fulfil our obligations so that we meet the requirements we're about to sign up to.
My confusion has melted away like snow in April.
Okay. I was going to go on to explain the chairs and vice chairs, but I thought that was a committee too far for me. Right, so I think we're ready to go. So, colleagues, the recommendation is at page 43, and if you remember, I amended it to be subject to the next meeting when Mr. Rose will bring back a further report on how we can work out our obligations. I'm happy to propose. Councillor A was happy to second. All in favour? Lovely, that's done. Thank you very much. So let's move then to item 9, which is on page 53, which is the report of it's the internal audit update. If I'm in the right place, aren't I? Yes, I am. Hannah Hellier, Senior Assurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our internal update report as of February 2026. Members are asked to review and consider the performance of Devon Audit Partnership and review and consider the outcomes of the work completed. So I won't go through every page, but on page 59 in the introduction, I would just like to highlight that we have now concluded our follow-up work on SEND. So our previous SEND report that was done last year, we gave no assurance. Pleased to say that from a follow-up, we have now provided limited assurance. So there has been some progress in that area. So we were really pleased to see that. Page 60 is just a pictorial representation of our assurance map. Page 61, this is a high-level summary of the results of the work that we have completed during the year and also shows you what we've got ongoing at present. Page 63, so this shows our head of internal audit opinion, and that is based on the work which we have completed to date. Again, you will see that overall for the council overall, we are giving reasonable assurance at this point in time. Children's services is still showing as limited, but we still have further work to do in that space, and that can change before we get to June. Page 64 shows our performance against the plan, and at the time of writing this in January, we had 41 audits and grant certifications completed, with 26 audits in progress, 5 of which were at draft stage at that point in time. And then page 66 onwards provides a summary of all the work we've completed since November 2025. I wasn't going to go through any of those. There's nothing there that I need to highlight to anybody, but happy to take any questions.
Councillor Morgan.
I think I asked last time, it would be really helpful to have an indication of direction of travel. So on Appendix 1, if we could see what it was at the last audit, just with a different colour, that would be really, really helpful. Because obviously we haven't got time to look at past papers, so that would just be helpful. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just respond to that. Yes, so I'm happy to do that. Please bear in mind that some of these audits haven't been done before, so there won't be a direction of travel, but we can make that clear for you. Yeah.
And I was simply going to ask, how could the committee, or how can members, if they want them, receive the full reports?
So yes, so if you would like to see the full reports, you can ask for them and we will send them to you. That is no problem at all.
Thank you very much. Members, I know you will have read the papers. Do you have anything on any of the reports that you've seen? If not, may I take you to page 53 where the recommendations are before you, which I'm happy to move. I have a seconder. Councillor Morgan seconding. Are we all in favour? Lovely, thank you. That's done. Let's move then to item 10, which is the Devon County Council fund balance, earmarked reserves. This is a report we asked for, isn't it, as I recall, for the last meeting. And we have our Director of Finance and Public Value and Councillor Pacheski as the Cabinet Member for Finance with us. I'm quite happy and we'll invite you both to speak, but can I just say I'm mindful that tomorrow is the council's budget meeting at which the council will decide what its strategy is. So I wanted to particularly thank both you and Councillor Wojciechowski for bringing the report to this meeting. My own view is that I think the members of the committee ought to note it today, because the budget meeting is tomorrow. The council might, for all I know, do something entirely different. So I'd like Councillor Wojciechowski to speak to the policy that's going to council, but I wasn't anticipating a long debate on it, because the council is meeting tomorrow and may decide to support it or do something entirely different. Is that all right? Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to allow the officers to introduce it for that very reason, that it is subject to the decision of the
So I like to be contrary, really, but you know, Director of Public Finance.
Thank you, Chair. So as you say, we had expected for the budget to have been set by now. And so the Audit Committee will be receiving it after it was an approved document. But as we know, due to the government's late announcement of the final settlement, that is not the case. The budget setting is now tomorrow. So we are slightly out of sync. So although the strategy has been to Cabinet, it's not yet been to County Council. But happy to discuss it at your next meeting if that is helpful to your committee. And then you will obviously then have the final approved version.
Thank you very much. Anything, Councillor Wojciechowski? No. And just to remind members, we asked for the report because it came through our auditors, just expressing caution about the council's long-term trajectory regarding its reserves and balances. Of course, that was prior to the government's announcement on the send and the safety valve. So that, you know, people say a week's a long time in politics, isn't it? Well, you know, 2 weeks is a long time in local government finance, and you know, things have changed. So what I'd like, if the members are content, is to note the report and then come back our next meeting, because then the council will have set the budget and we can have a proper conversation. Is that okay? So I'll propose it. A seconder? Sorry? Oh, gosh.
Yeah, since we're unusual circumstances and timeline that has been a result of the national settlement being late, can I just check with the 151 officer, what is the process then between now and our processes with the auditors for the remainder of 2026, so that if it comes back to next meeting, I suppose I'm asking that question because it's been a delay for the government and the process of how we work with our auditors. Will there be any need for additional meeting, or will it all fit in the framework of the work we do with the auditors, whatever the council decision is?
So I'll ask David to come in and confirm, but the recommendation, the improvement recommendation from Grant Thornton, our external auditors, as part of the value for money study last year, was that in essence the County Council improves its reserves position. So that decision is tomorrow as part of the County Council. My expectation is that that will be sufficient to appease the recommendation, to deliver on the recommendation from Grant Thornton, provided it is agreed as it stands, obviously. I don't think it's a requirement of Grant Thornton that the Audit Committee itself review it. So I'm not expecting the delay in your discussion of the reserves to impact on the value for money study that's coming up, but I'll bring David in to speak for Grant Thornton.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what the Section 151 officer said, that you've done all that we'd asked for in terms of that recommendation. So the timing is unfortunate due to circumstances beyond your control, but in terms of addressing the recommendation, we're satisfied with that, and there's no need for the committee to meet again.
Well, I think we are going to meet again. I'll come to you in a moment. So we are going to meet again. So I think, just to remind colleagues, our conversation last time was it's not for the Audit Committee to determine what the level of reserve should be, but in order to provide the robust and constructive challenge about, we've had some words from our auditors, what action is being taken, what consideration is being made of that, and that's what we were having a report on. Councillor Brazil, Leader of the Council.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wonder, because obviously at the budget meeting tomorrow we won't have the external auditors there, and I wonder if it would be quite interesting to hear their views on, obviously what they see with this recommendation, and you know, if the timelines have been stuck, we wouldn't be worried about agreeing this and then having to rewrite it at the budget meeting tomorrow. But just as a hypothetical question really to the external auditors, what would their feeling is that this budget reserves plan is thrown out the window, and actually we don't actually start trying to boost our reserves, and in fact look to spend that on other issues? And what would their likely impression or report be if that was the case?
Mr. Bray, are you able to accommodate a response?
I mean, it's almost impossible to give a direct response to that question. I think the key thing would be, we made a recommendation last year which was agreed, as to the extent to which that's being implemented. I suppose there's always the chance that there's mitigating circumstances that doesn't mean that it is possible this year. So I think we'd need to consider the reasons for it, and also what the scale of any spending of reserves would be really. So it's almost impossible to comment on that any further in any absence of any detail on that. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that I am new to the audit this time, so I'm sort of commenting on previous work, and it's probably not appropriate to do that. But you know, we would always look to follow up on previous recommendations, and would potentially be critical where an authority has agreed a recommendation and has then not gone on to implement it. But again, with the current VFM arrangements, it's not a binary decision as a sort of yes or no as it was in years gone by. So we will come to a rounded conclusion.
Thank you. I think your deft sidestepping of a fast-moving ball is to be admired. But I think from Councillor Brazil's point of view, if I could put it in terms of the question that was asked, which is clearly the Council and the Cabinet and the Chief Finance Officer have responded to the Grant Thornton holding the mirror up in its last report, saying you ought to address the issue of reserves. And the Audit Committee took that on and said, well, what's happening? I think the Audit Committee takes reassurance that within, you know, the period of the last meeting of this, there is a report. Just so happens that there's a council meeting tomorrow. But I think the leader was asking, and fairly enough, well, what would be the view of our external auditors if, for example, council decided to not proceed with the recommendation on reserves? Where would it be? And I'm assuming, so this might be an easier answer for you, I'm assuming from that the concern that Grant Thornton raised a year ago would continue.
I mean, yes, you're right. The concern would still continue. The sort of the supplementary part of the question must be, and what happens if the reserves kept on declining? And that's difficult to answer until you know the extent of that. But you know, we would always be critical of a recommendation that wasn't followed up. And again, without wishing to set alarm bells ringing here or anything unnecessarily, we would always be mindful of the fact that, you know, were reserves to continue in a downwards trajectory as to whether or not there was anything else we wanted to do as far as reporting is concerned. Because as we all know, reserves in a very challenging financial setting, reserves are very easy to spend, very, very difficult to rebuild. So again, that we just need to be mindful of that, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Bray. Can I just take us to the recommendation? Then it was the Audit Committee notes the attached county fund balance. May I just simply say I don't particularly want the committee to deal with that recommendation because it's the council meeting tomorrow, but can we just simply agree that we defer the paper until the next meeting? Would that be all right? May I thank Councillor Bachesky and Andrew Sinclair, our Director of Finance, for their work in bringing it to us so quickly. Is that all right? Content with that? So we'll defer that item. Thank you. Let's move to item 11 then, which is the risk management strategy, and it's Brad Hutton, the Senior Assurance Manager.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So we are starting with the risk management strategy and policy document from page 95 onwards. The Council's current risk management policy is outdated and requires updating. This new policy and strategy document combines the two previous documents into one and outlines the approach to risk management at DCC. This document has been reviewed by and written by a combination of risk champions, ourselves as the risk management team, but in addition, leadership teams, directors, the executive leadership group, including the chief executive, and also been reviewed by yourself, Chair, as the Audit Committee, and Councillor James Wachowski, the Cabinet Member for Finance. Broadly, the process in how the Council manages risk remains the same. However, there are two key changes that I need to alert members to. Firstly, risk appetite. Central government do issue some guidance for local authorities around risk appetite, which we have adopted. Rather than just one very broad risk appetite statement, we have created risk appetite categories alongside an overarching statement, and you can see these from page 107 onwards. And the second key change is our scoring, and to ensure the Council focuses on recovery action for the biggest impact risks, we're introducing a 5x6 weight and impact risk matrix, which you can see on page 102. And to supplement that, we have created some scoring guidance, which you can see on page 103 and 104. Chair, I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions there may be.
Thank you. Questions from members? And maybe questions on the next paper, which I think is also yours as well, isn't it? Yes, all right. So at 93 is a recommendation that the committee reviews and considers. I'm taking the lack of questions that you've read it and there are no questions from there. So may we approve the use of the document proposed, seconded by Councillor Hayward. All in favour of that? Thank you very much. So we'll move then crisply on to item 12, which is also Brad, the Senior Assurance Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is my standing regular item of the risk management update, page 115 onwards. Again, Chair, I take the paper as read as per your recommendation at the beginning there. However, just one major point I'll alert the members to, and this is for assistance with the executive leadership group. The historic very high health and safety and wellbeing risk has now been archived and replaced with two new risks. And you can see those detailed on page 117 and 18. We're working with senior leadership to establish effective controls in place, and following really positive actually initial discussions, plans are in place to hopefully reduce those risk scores going on. I'll stop there, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. The question I wanted to ask wasn't in relation to the division of those risks. It's just obviously you've identified a new risk, local government reorganisation, and a draft risk, a huge piece of work whenever government announce whatever the result be. Could you describe something to the committee about how you go about assessing that risk, and how in particular, I think this is a question that members will have in mind, how are the risks identified? Because there'll be shared risks between whatever organisations are merging or joining together or being disaggregated or aggregated. There's a lot of unknowns.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good question, and you're right. We're in this in between phase at the moment where we're not sort of unsure of, what the risk may be or who indeed owns those risks at that time. I think there's a couple of key things that spring to mind when we're looking to assess this risk in terms of assets and property, governance and decision making, legal and regulation, and scrutiny and governance. But I think until that time when we're sure, we can't be completely crystal as to who owns those risks and indeed what the mitigations are. I can tell you, Chair, that there's work going on in the background in terms of setting up these risks, understanding where at the present time what those risks are, and we're working with executive leadership group and officers to identify and mitigate those.
So I don't know how to phrase the question, but it comes to something like this: given the enormity of what local government reorganisation is for all of the employees and members as well, but mainly the employees, managers, in terms of risk, does the council have sufficient capacity for that new, quite significant additional responsibility in terms of identifying, managing, and responding to risk?
Thank you, Chair. That's a good question. Yes, I from a risk management point of view, yes, I think we're on hand, obviously, to support that work in terms of identifying, assessing, and crucially, helping mitigate those. But I'll pause and let the Chief Executive come in.
It was just a bit too brief then when you did the pause, Mr. Hunt. You should have carried on. I think it's my job to decide when the chief executive comes in, but you're quite right, chief executive.
No, I would say no. And I would say no from the point of we're currently engaging with colleagues across the country who are describing the LGR process as chaos. So I think it's important to communicate that level of stress involved in the organisations ahead of us. And it comes down to the timing of what's expected and what's been set in the government's time frame. No, we don't have the ability to continue to transform, to improve, and maintain, say, status quo in the timelines that are being set. And that's clear from engaging with colleagues who are ahead of us. So that's a no. The other thing I would say is that, and it's all linked to the timeline. If the timeline wasn't what it was, then I think we could do a much better job. But what's expected in Devon within the timeline will create substantial service delivery risks in every aspect of our work. I think the other thing, and just in reflection, you said earlier about change, there's one thing about this risk matrix is it separates out risks as if you're dealing with one at a time. If you just look to the month of January, we have had major event after a major event, and eventually that takes its toll on the organisation. And so again, with LGR, there will be a need to twin track all our activity in the council in order to do the day-to-day business and then do the change business. So no, we don't have the capacity to do that in this time frame at the moment. And knowing that already the start to 2026 has had significant impact on our residents in different communities in different places, there is an accumulative effect of dealing with risk after risk. And I'm sure you as members have experienced that start to 2026 as well. So I think, Chair, there is something to consider. How many of these risks are you dealing with at once, and then the impact it has as you go through an annual calendar. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I thought that was very helpful because I think very often local government is best when it's racing towards a problem and it does it fleet of foot and gets the job done. But something like LGR, which most of us have not experienced, as in last happened here in 1974, is so enormous. And while people might talk about, how the service is organised, risk is so significant, even just, for example, cyber, staff safety, whatever it might be, just for continuity of service. And based on what you said, Chief Executive, I'm sort of wondering whether there's a role for the committee. So I'm glad the leader of the council's here as well, whether there's a role for the committee to write to the Secretary of State just to focus on the risk issues of a rushed local government organisation. I'm quite satisfied that local government organisations happen. When I say I'm satisfied, the government have been very clear about it. I don't want to, I don't think we want to write to them and say, oh, well, you shouldn't do it. But we can write to them and say, whatever your timeline is, if the more that it's hastened, the more that it's rushed, the more risk is built in. And we might ask, the Chief Executive to draft a letter to go under the name of the committee on this. But now, can I just, this is a bit off the cuff, is that okay with you, Chief Executive? So would the committee be content with that? Yes? All right, so we're content with that. So we'll bank that as an action. And I'm going to come there in a minute. Thank you very much. And then the only other thing is just to do the recommendation, but Leader of the Council.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that suggestion. Can I just say that I think obviously Councillor Arnott is leads for us on LGR and devolution, and he is absolutely moving in the same direction that you are, as one. So it may be helpful that perhaps a joint letter from both yourself as chair of this committee and indeed Councillor Arnott expressing those views. And like you, this isn't about saying we don't want to do LGR. It's just about that, you're now moving into dangerous territory and you will end up with the worst of all possible worlds. If you rush it, if we take our time and do it in a more managed way, then absolutely we can get a better result for everyone.
I'm really glad you said that, as leader of the council, because there's also the consequence of a law of unintended consequences. Although when you rush to do something, you can do it well, but there can be unintended consequence. Risk is about making sure there isn't an unintended consequence, that it's planned through. I don't think the committee's pressures around who signs it, so I'm very happy if it's a shared letter, on behalf of the committee and the deputy leader with the LGR response. I think it's a fine thing. What we need to do is get the letter off pretty darn quick, don't we? And that can be done this week, can't it? So brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Can I take you back to the recommendations then are proposed? May I take a seconder, please? Councillor Morgan seconding. We're all in favour, and that's brilliant. That's all done. Thank you. So let's move to item 13, which is the update on the development of a strategic performance framework. And it's Toby Ellett, who's the Assistant Director of Performance and Policy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so the purpose of introducing this performance management framework is to have a consistent approach over the next few years about organisational level performance reporting, and the idea is to tie it always back to the Council's strategic plan. It's about making delivery against those strategic aims everybody's responsibility across the Council. We're delivering this in 3 phases. You can see the diagram on page 127, and there's been some significant progress since the last committee meeting, and indeed since the report was published. So in that time, we're completing that first phase, which is about identifying 35 indicative indicators to sit against the Council's 35 goals and commitments. So we have identified lead directorates for each of those 35. We've defined a measure for each of those. We've been collecting data against the most recent outcome for those measures, and we've defined how each of those are to be judged. And there's a calculated RAG assessment against each of them. So on our scorecard, we have 35 defined indicators. We have 32 with the most recent outturn data against them, and 31 have a calculated RAG assessment. We're also building an interactive online scorecard, which will be built on as we go out, and will be available for members to check on most recent performance at any time. And we've taken that scorecard to the Council Strategic Performance Board and taken on recommendations from them. They will be the owners of that scorecard. Our next steps will be to take the top level scorecard, those 35 indicators, to Cabinet next month, where it'll get its first airing. And then in the next quarter, we're building the second level, which is up to 5 additional supported measures to fill in gaps and to provide context for those top level 35 indicative indicators. That's it. Thank you.
I was waiting for a kind of finish. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Can I ask you a question, if I may, when we come to committee members in a moment? What do you see as the role of the Audit Committee in the strategic performance framework? How can we best assist? What is it you think we should do?
So my understanding is the role of the committee is to ensure that we are doing what we said we'd do, so fulfilling that the promise that we've made about putting in place a framework, but also to check the progress of that framework and check that understanding is correct. So at this stage, we haven't attached the performance scorecard because it's not complete, so it's going to Cabinet first, but also because actually it's not the job, I think, of this committee to look at the individual indicators or to look at the outturn from those indicators. That might be the job of scrutiny committees. So the job here is for the committee to be assured that the Council has a framework in place and is providing information against it.
So it would be fair to say at the moment that we will be assured, because you will have it, but it's not quite there at the minute. But the timescale is set out in 2.2, isn't it? About when it will be ready, I think.
Yes, that's correct. So the plan is that we are introducing the framework of the phased approach. So the first phase will be complete for this coming cabinet in March, and then in 3-month stages. So in quarterly stages, we'll be putting them in.
Okay, so one more question for me, and then I'll go over to the Chief Executive. At para 3.15, which is on page 129, it says the Audit Committee will receive regular updates. So from your point of view, what did you mean by regular?
So regular at the moment, I would suggest is every quarter, because we're updating the process quarterly. So if you're happy, we would be comfortable with currently every quarter. Once we get to full implementation, you might want to take a decision that quarterly is perhaps too frequent.
We're going to bank quarterly for the moment in the minutes. Thank you very much. Chief Executive.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think in terms of response to your question, 3.1 is key in terms of making that, are we doing what we said we're going to do and having a framework in place. But I would reference it to the national discussion at the moment and the national headlines around what is signposted in section 3.4 is how are we assured that we are looking inwards, outwards, forwards. That's a really complex piece. Just noting of interest today, national governments, development of a scorecard for local government. So we have our scrutiny committees, but I suppose what Audit's able to do is to do that inwards, outwards, forwards and not have it siloed, but look at it overall, as well as looking out in and forwards. And back to previous discussion, how is that linked to risk? So I think it's really, it's a safety net, isn't it, to make sure that the standards that we could be looking at in different parts of the council all come together to make sure that's all accounted for. And I think specifically because there's the absence of a national framework at the moment, it is a risk for everyone, and that doesn't exist. We were expecting that to develop 2 years ago, and we're still waiting for it. So it's a bit about trying to lead in this area as well. We see that in some of the reports and Audit today, where we see at a later date where we've developed an approach to risk that's quite innovative. And so, why would we not lead the way when there is lack of national direction in this area?
That's really helpful. And from my point of view, I just wanted the committee to be clear about what its role is in this and who owns the management of the performance. Cabinet scrutiny, as in, Cabinet, they're driving, it's their plan on behalf of the council. Scrutiny have a role. Audit is not a second chamber of scrutiny, but our job is to say, do you have a scorecard? Is it effective? Is it enabling the council to monitor what it's doing? And we need to have that sort of sharply in our minds, so we're not all trying to duplicate and move into other people's space. And sort of, words like regular, if I just may take a moment, it probably means something different to everyone around the room. So, for me, it's just getting that clarity about when the committee should expect a report. And I'm perfectly fine with quarterly, start with it. Maybe we move to twice yearly and, whatever, because we're satisfied that scrutiny and the cabinet are doing it properly in terms of a timescale that enables them to respond to, excessively good performance or excessively poor performance. And that's why the questions are asked. To be clear in our minds, in our minutes, about what we do. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering if officers and auditors have any intelligence about how other audit committees in other councils are managing this. You say there's not a national thing. Are we all in the same boat?
You, Chair. Yeah, it varies greatly, I think, from what I've seen. So there are a number who almost take on a scrutiny role where they look at the performance itself and ask questions about that. But I think that's perhaps less helpful. And there are some that don't touch it at all. And I think the ones that do it best look at the process and ensure that the process is strong.
Councillor Rake.
Chair, I hope you'll forgive my ignorance, but And I know the assistant director said it wasn't our job to look at what the indicative performance measures are, but could we have an example? I don't really know what we're talking about, to be honest.
Yes, absolutely. So the council in its strategic plan defined 35 commitments, and each of those commitments has a goal. It's very difficult to get a single indicator that represents all the activity that might occur within that commitment and that goal. So we're looking for indicators that, well, we've been negotiating around indicators that best match, but perhaps don't cover completely what's said. So they are indicative rather than complete. If I give you an example, so the council has a goal to provide the right services for the right children, young people at the right time. The indicative measure we're suggesting using is the percentage of care experienced young people in employment, education and training. So while that doesn't cover all children, it doesn't cover all services, it does pick a particular set of young people who have a particular set of needs and says whether we're providing what's required at the right place at the right time.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
all right, fine. In that case, then, if I take you to the recommendation, which simply note the first phase of the development of the strategic performance framework, and we've had a consideration of that. Proposed, seconded by Councillor Hayward. All content? Yes, we're all content. Thank you very much. So let's move then to item 14, which is the 2024-25 exemption from tender overview, and Justin Bennett's Assistant Director of Procurement. Justin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. May I take you to paper beginning page 131 on the reports pack. This paper endeavours to serve two purposes really. The first is to pick up an improvement recommendation from our external auditors, Grant Thornton, whereby committee will be familiar with myself traditionally taking a 1-year annual overview to present for transparency all of the county council's direct contract awards during each financial year. Grant Thornton is improvement recommendation, which we're happy to take, of course, is that rather than presenting a single 1-year collated 12-month overview of all direct awards, but rather I present to committee a little and often approach. So in essence, to present the recommendation is that I make myself available for committee to review each 3-monthly cycle of direct contract awards, which would mean that I would come here to attend every meeting to provide a synopsis of each prevailing 3-monthly cycle, rather than the quite hard, quite sometimes more significant information of an annual overview. So the first recommendation to consider, if you would, is whether you'd like to move to that quarterly rolling reporting basis. And secondly, the report then goes on to prepare ourselves for that eventuality, whereby I've made available the recent 9 months exemption from tender, which cover April to December 2025, such that if committee is happy to move to a quarterly reporting cycle, we are right up to date, because every exemption has taken us right up now to the end of December. And the appendix section, pages 139 to 144, gives a headline narrative of each direct award, of which there are 61 from April to December 2025. It gives the brief rationale, the headline as to reason why, and is presented for transparency, and of course in essence, to demonstrate good practice as to how the overall process is operating, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate that. And committee asked for this following the external auditor's advice about seeing them more frequently than annually. So that's our first report. And you have reports or notes of the various exemptions that have been agreed for the past 9 months. So I'm assuming again, colleagues have read the papers. Are there any questions on either the report or any of the exemptions? Councillor Morgan?
Just a briefer on the very first one. It's quite an oversight, isn't it, to not advertise it properly for something that's a value of nearly £3 million. It sort of give me a little bit of an alarm bell, the very first one that I read. And also number 6. This is on the first page of the you know, a year ago we were basically looking at spending money on LGR. There's a few things here that raise alarm bells about, not necessarily here, but what's going on and what we're having to spend money on without it going through a proper procurement exercise.
And some of that will inevitably be emergency, and the officer can come back to it. And some of that is why it's reported, isn't it? So the committee can then inquire of officers to how those circumstances came about and what mitigations there are in there. Mr. Bennett, is there anything that needs to be said in response, mindful that we're in part 1?
Yes, yeah, sure. In terms of the first item, it's in some respects is a little bit of a technicality as to why the CSET service took this through exemption. I'd like to assure committee that 16 providers were invited to full competition on this project. The reason it is here is purely that the exemption was from the advertising protocol under financial regulations in order to specifically target providers that would be best placed to compete for this particular scheme. I'm grateful, Councillor, for you raising it, and hopefully the Council's procedure, which ensured we targeted 16 of the very best contractors for this, hopefully speaks to that first inquiry. With regard to the appointment of local government advisory support, I think probably the comment to make here is we're in fairly unprecedented times in terms of the local government reorganisation proposals, and we needed to move very, very quickly to get the very, very best advisors, and all councils subject to local government reorganisation would be pursuing the same providers at exactly the same time. And I think if we, and probably many other councils, took the time to compete, all those advisors would have been already appointed by other clients and we would have missed out on them.
Thank you very much. Other questions? And I, for the record, just need to say that it's not necessarily declaring an interest, but there are several items in the exemptions which relate to matters in the Exmouth and Holden division specifically, and in noting them, I'm not commenting upon them. 2 of them relate to a potential planning matter, and I'm a member of the Council's Development Management Committee. So for that purpose, and for the purpose of transparency, but in noting them, I note what the Council has done tender-wise, but without commenting on them in any other way. And I just thought I'd better mention that. Right, take you to the recommendations on page 131. I'm happy to move. Sorry.
Just wondering, Chair, mindful of what you've just said,
yeah,
would it be appropriate perhaps if I propose that and then seek another seconder,
yeah,
and then that just provides a bit more comfort?
Lovely, thank you very much.
On item 14, recommendations A and B as listed, I'll propose as Vice Chair. Councillor Rake seconds. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, appreciated. So let's move to item 15. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Item 15, which is the Audit Committee SIPFA Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountants self-assessment, page 145, and it's Mr. Rose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. As a recap, we met for a workshop at the end of last November for this item, using that predefined framework for a self-assessment that the committee contributed to. The report you see is a summary of that outcome, and it recognises where there are good things happening and where there might be actions that could be taken forward now that the committee's had a little time to settle. The key message really is that this is something as a self-assessment that the committee now need to own. Any actions need to be built into a plan of sorts that the committee might be able to look at, monitor itself against, etc. But also clear to note that there is a period of time that needs to elapse, and we would need to come back and look at this again to make sure that there are no other areas and to also note progress. So my summary really, Chair, is that thank you for engaging in it to all members of the committee, and hopefully it provides a sound basis for an action plan of sorts.
Thank you, and thank you for organising the event in which we self-examined our knowledge of audit and all this. It's actually quite enjoyable once it finished, but it was very good. And you know, reading it in the cold light of day, you think, oh gosh. Anyway, members, any questions? But I did think it was brilliant as a new committee to start its journey of looking at what we've been doing. So one feels that there's a highway to success for us as auditors. Councillor Ray.
To echo Councillor Morgan's earlier suggestion, I think future versions of this self-assessment should definitely include a direction of travel to see if we've got better, worse, or gone sideways.
I'm all in favour of direction of travel for other people. Is us. That's no, you're quite right. Thank you very much, and we'll have that noted down. Thank you. Anyway, Chief Executive.
Just for public transparency, I thought it was interesting to see the good practice audit, which is delightful, but in the areas of significant improvement or development, I just wondered if we wanted to comment publicly on how those would be addressed, so that it's not a committee looking at its own committee, if you, because there's lots of really no further improvement activities, but I do note that there's some areas that on the good practice guide ask for significant improvement.
I'm sure you had another meeting to go to, didn't you? Well, this is an iterative process, and Mr. Rose is able to guide us. What next should we be doing, officer?
Thank you, Chair and Chief Executive. I think completely transparently, as you say, there are actions in there that require improvement and are noted, and some of those are done. The truth is, I think what we need to do is come back at a midpoint in time around 6 months from now to recognise again the report and what has changed at that point, and that would be different to a new self-assessment. It is actually tracking that progress around what's happened and allowing, as it were, the public to see whether that progress has been made or not.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
I just want to ask a question
yeah.
at page 159. So it says we don't have an action plan. Whose responsibility is it to make sure we have an action plan? Is it us as a committee? Is it internal audit?
If I may briefly, Chair, essentially it is the role of the committee. However, I'm loosely looking at the role of governance manager who might be helping you with that. But the appendix you've got in this document gives you a starting point for that at the very least.
What one senses that the room has suddenly taken sides, and there's a this side and a that side. But let me be ever the diplomat. I'd already been talking with our support officer in terms of how we move this forward. So there is work for the committee to do. The committee owns its own development, and we'll be looking to key officers to help with that in the in our journey of development, as it were. So I'm very mindful of the things there, some of which has already been done. So while the committee's been actually very good, for example, about writing to cabinet members and officers saying, have you seen this? What are you doing about it? Nothing to report back. We're not shy of holding the mirror up to ourselves. And that's an important part of being an open and transparent audit committee ourselves, isn't it? Never has had it. It's Councillor Rake.
The risk of identifying myself even more firmly on one side rather than the other, Chair. I mean, some of the areas where we did not comply or required significant improvement were purely self-referential in terms of, did we have an action plan to identify weaknesses, given that this was the first time we had, to address identified weaknesses. Given that this was the first time that we were identifying weaknesses, it would have been impossible to have such a plan. So hopefully some of those will disappear just by the function of time and structure.
Well, it's fine, isn't it? The self-examination in public is always going to be a bit more so embarrassing, perhaps. But you're quite right. I think the committee started out robustly. There was a good commonality when we were doing the self-assessment. I think we have a good foundation to go on, and we are doing things. So it will progress. So I think we'll pick up Mr. Rose's offer of a 6-month update and see whether we can progress to a green card or whatever. Councillor Hayward.
And perhaps some little red books, Chair, might be appropriate
Some red books.
for our internal self-assessments.
All right, thank you. Colleagues, content with the recommendations? Proposed, seconded, all in favour? Yes, thank you very much. Let's move most rapidly then to item 16, which was a Cabinet response to the Audit Committee task group, and primarily to note, unless the leader and the Cabinet of Finance want to comment, to note, we did the piece of work on the highways process for the maintenance contract through council. We sent a report to Cabinet, and as you can see, Cabinet agreed with our recommendations. It was a good piece of work, I think, and it's helped the Cabinet in theirs. I don't think there's anything much more to say, but unless leader you'd like to, no, that's fine. Right, shall we just note the recommendation then? Are we content with that? Brilliant, thank you very much. Let's move to item 17, which is the Audit Committee annual report, and that's on page 169, or it will be. When it gets up there. And that is to remind the committee that we decided we should do an annual report for council. Council's annual meeting is in May. So this year we are asking that the committee delegates to me and the Vice Chair in consultation with the Director of Legal and Democratic Services, if you like, the content of that report. I think for future years, we would want that to be a process of committee, not a process of delegation. But in order to make this year's council meeting, it's of necessity, really. And if you're happy to do that, and the report sets out, the work in hand. Director of Legal, is there anything you need to add to that, or was that an admirable summation?
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Chair. But definitely would welcome that there's much more of an iterative process with committee next year.
Thank you. Any questions? I'm happy to propose. Councillor Hayward, a second. Are we all agreed? Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. So let's go then to item 18, which is matters for information. And your colleagues will remember that we've written to various people to draw their attention on things. We've had their replies back. Are there any questions about the responses or the work of the committee in what we've done? And also to add that the CIRS response regarding highways as well, which I think was circulated separately, the Corporate Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee, Scrutiny Committee. All right. Okay, well, can I move that we accept and note the responses we've had? Are we content with that? So I propose Councillor Hayward seconding. We're all in favour. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. We don't have anything in part 2. So just to remind you that we have our next meeting on the 18th of June. Thank you very, very much.